switch back over to my script, grab my phone and retweet myself. Well, retweet the show. Excellent. All right. And then I will switch it back over so folks can see us. I guess they could have heard me before, but now they can see in here.
Oh, nice.
Lewis, say something again.
Forms.
Hello, my friends.
Okay, it looked like the audio was picking up for you. For whatever reason, it's not showing you like it normally does in OBS, but it sounds like you were coming through anyway.
Okay.
So.
All right. Am I centered in my picture? The background behind me is not symmetrical, and it keeps throwing me off. I'm distracted by it.
I think
my
you're
particular
fine,
brand of
yeah.
OCD. Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's not going to bother me, but I don't have your particular
Right.
brand of OCD, so
Right.
you do what you got to do.
That's right. It's ridiculous, man. I'm such a weirdo. Yeah.
All right, so everybody's doing well?
Yes, my friend. Yeah,
Making it
doing
through
really good.
life okay at the moment?
Yeah, I'm excited that that the Tome Show News has almost completely taken over your show, Jeff. There's with Tracy and me and Aaron, who is clearly the best editor in the Tomeverse.
Yeah.
I think I have to legally defer to Sam, but only legally.
Yeah.
Only legally.
Well, Sam, I get the impression, because I oftentimes offer, like when I know Sam is falling behind on editing and stuff, I will offer oftentimes to be like, hey, I've got some free time, and I used to edit everything. I'm happy to hop back in and do some editing to help you catch up. Whatever. No, I got it. And Sam won't let me do anything. So, honestly, if there weren't some moments where I didn't pre-talk to Aaron before I talked to Sam about editing some things, Sam would probably just want to do it all. So,
yeah.
But it works out, especially with the more time-sensitive things like the news and that kind of stuff. That way, Sam's not working through a backlog. It might be a month or two before the news came out, and that wouldn't be helpful.
That's right.
So.
That's not very newsy.
That'd be the olds at that point.
And I assume you're still doing
Correct.
stuff. You're still helping Paige and Ginny with the round table when they do stuff.
Yeah. So I'll be doing roundtable news and book club, and technically also that secret project that has stalled that you talked about.
The side quest one. Were you doing
Yes.
that one? Yeah, that did what it did. We got one done, and then haven't gone anywhere really since then. So I don't know what the story is. I mean, I can tell you the story, but probably not when we're live on the air. So.
Sure.
That's just exciting that you have secret quests going
Well,
on, Aaron. Good for you.
Yeah, it's one that he was working on a while ago, and nothing has happened with it for what's it been? 6 months, 9 months?
Yeah, like a year almost. Yeah,
because it was during the pandemic that we started working on it, but then
right. Yes.
yeah, things happened.
It was a good episode. I'll see if I can finish it.
It was a good episode, and
get something out.
I wouldn't hate still doing it, but yeah, we got to figure out how to get that into the routine and make it happen. So anyway, shall we go ahead and get started? Gotta make sure I have
I just need one more minute real quick.
Okay,
Except Tracy needs a minute.
then we'll keep chit chatting.
And we all do what Tracy wants. The universe works best if we just all do what Tracy wants.
I absolutely.
She brings order to our chaos. Yeah. So Aaron, tell me something good that's happened with you in the last week.
Well, I don't know, man. I'm playing lots of D&D recently, which is good, of course. I've got 4 games a week, one of which I'm a player in.
Nice.
So that's been good. Only possible because there's not a lot of work happening in Toronto. Basically, because it's the summer, so the music stuff that I do always dries up in the summer. But also, of course, COVID stuff.
Right, as I say, because you've been you've done performances and stuff too. So I imagine that's all dried up because people aren't going to concerts and whatever right now.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's all regulations, of course, preventing gatherings and such. But I'm still doing some teaching, which is good.
Nice.
Music stuff. But
where are you teaching at?
So I teach at it's like kind of private school. It's like a public private school. I teach music theory for disadvantaged youth.
Okay.
So they get their lessons subsidized by the hall that I teach at.
Okay,
it's not
cool.
like a big official school or anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. Trace, you back?
Yeah, sorry
All
about
right,
that.
no problem. Everything okay on that end?
Yeah, Fred just sometimes forgets that there's no door down here, so if he's in the kitchen, I can.
I see.
I was hearing the microwave and everything, and I was like, oh no.
Well, if it helps, I couldn't hear any of that, so I don't think it'll come through on the audio, but...
Good.
I was muted, yeah, but...
Right.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Little Freddy's doing all right?
Yeah, so hopefully he won't join us tonight at some point, like he did that one night.
That's fine. I think everybody's gotten so used to, because through the pandemic, everybody's gotten used to, working at home and having pets and kids and whatever just sort of show up during meetings that, it's just part of the charm now.
Oh yeah, I totally wasn't expecting it, and then I felt a hand on my arm, and I was
Yeah.
like...
I suspect I may have known he was there before you did.
That's awesome.
I forget what episode that was, but yeah. So, all right, shall we get going?
Let's do it.
Over
Ready.
here and hit record on the audio, and then get my mouse back over there. There we go. All right. This episode of the Tome Show is brought to you by Galder's Gazetteer, a book that adds advanced rules and raises money to fight cancer, and listeners like you. Thanks for becoming patrons at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Welcome to The Tome, a D&D news, reviews, and interviews show, and I'm your Tome host, Jeff Greiner.
And I'm
Yeah, you
Tracy
are.
Hurley, and in this episode,
Sorry.
number 300... All right,
I must have taken this copied the script from an episode that you weren't on. So
Yeah, the wrong numbers. It's okay. I've been editing while we're talking.
Well, good. Thank you.
And I'm your co-host, Tracy Hurley, and in this episode, number 352, we're going to get a regular dose of rules, adventures, classes, and more as we look at the first 4 issues of Arcadia, the digital magazine from MCDM Productions.
And we have an all-star stellar group for this discussion. First up, you know him from the Tome Show News Desk, where he brings you all the latest in the D&D world. It's one of the few members of the Tome Show family who is ordained. Welcome back, Lewis Brenton.
Hey, thanks for having me. I didn't know there were any others. I'm fascinated to hear that story.
I think it was about 5 or 10 years ago I was ordained in the Church of Life online. I filled out a form and that was it.
Sure.
so that makes 2 of us,
I'll profess that my process was a bit more
I
rigorous
imagine,
than
yeah. I imagine. Yours maybe is a little more meaningful. Secondly, we have another member of the Tome Show family with us, probably the most talented member, if we're all being honest. He's a musician who plays trombone in orchestras and stuff, and he also helps out with some of the audio editing so Sam doesn't get buried under it all. He's here for one of his few non-editing appearances, although he's in many episodes that he's edited. He's the one who makes all of us sound really good. Welcome back, Aaron Good.
It's me. Hello. Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
And for folks who don't know what Arcadia is, it's a digital magazine published under Matt Colville's production company, helmed by a friend of the show, James Introcaso, and it features 3 to 4 articles per issue for about $7 each, or you can get each issue if you're a patron at Matt Colville's Patreon for $5 a month, and it's very much in the vein of the old Dungeons and Dragons magazines or Cobalt Quarterly and some of those other attempts to be the successor to those old magazines.
But before we dive further into that, I want to let everybody know about our sponsor, Galdur's Gazetteer. This is a product from Zipperon Games, available through DriveThruRPG. It gives advanced rules to sort of up your D&D game, and then gives you like updates to classes and spells and adventures and all this other stuff to support those advanced rules, so they don't sort of leave you hanging anywhere. You've got that all the way through to help you make it a reality. And this was done for somebody named Lawrence. Lawrence had cancer, wanted his character to become part of the D&D lore, and so this product was born, and all of the proceeds from it go to cancer research. You can find links in the show notes at thetomeshow.com to both the product at DriveThruRPG and Lawrence's story. So, let's get started talking about Arcadia by MCDM. And I think it's worth pointing out, in the interest of full disclosure, not only is this edited by friend of the show, James Intercasso, but I think 3 of the 4 of us are working from review copies that we received from them. Myself, Tracy, and Lewis, you're working from review copies as well? And Aaron,
Yes,
Aaron, you got your own. Are you buying them individually? Are you a patron?
Yeah, I'm a patron of the MCDM Patreon, so I get all them monthly as they come out for $5.
Nice. Although they haven't come out exactly monthly, right? They seem to come out like 2 months on, 1 month off, something like that, or they've missed 1 or 2.
Yeah, the first 3 issues came out in back-to-back months. They took some time off to reevaluate their business plan or something, and they put out some other content in that space, and then the 4th one is their first one back on a monthly pace.
Okay.
And if I recall correctly, they said that was their plan, was to run 3 episodes or 3 releases, and then evaluate. And seems like they've decided to keep on trucking.
Well, so far so good anyway, right? And so this will be our sort of, I think, testing the waters, talking about it, seeing how they're doing so far, see sort of what we think about where they're at, and what have you. And I wanted to start off by getting, in a sense of sort of getting sort of each of our perspectives, right? I wanted to ask some questions around that. And so I wanted to start by asking sort of, this is a Matt Colville sort of helmed project, right? James Intercasso is the editor, and Matt hasn't written, I don't think, wrote any of the articles, but it's being published under his name. He's working on it clearly to some degree, and so I'm curious, what is each of our sort of experiences with Matt Colville and the world of D&D that he inhabits? And I can start off. I am obviously familiar with him through his YouTube channel. And I subscribe to the YouTube channel, but I don't watch every episode. I'm not one of the big sort of super fans of Matt Colville. Not that he's not doing good work. I've read several of the things that he's done. Just that, I don't know, my time is limited, and 20-minute weekly YouTube videos don't usually make it onto my priority list, unless it's a topic that I need to hear right now. So, what about the rest of you?
Sure, I'll go next. I've got I watch Matt's stuff on YouTube on an occasional basis. I don't catch every single thing, but I really appreciate the stuff he's putting out. I find him very clever and pretty funny. Honestly, the parts of his work that I've actually followed the most meticulously are not D&D related, but Dune related, because that's one of my side fan interests besides D&D stuff. And he is a fount of Dune knowledge. And when the Dune games started coming back on the scene again, he hit that pretty hard, and I followed what he was doing and the things he was talking about with Dune very rigorously. Yeah, so I know him more from that, and of course I've got like his Strongholds and Followers book, and probably some other things that he's done. I can't remember. You know how it is. We all have mountains of PDFs that we that we own. Yeah.
Tracy?
Okay, and then for me, I did back Strongholds and Followers, but a lot of that is because my husband Fred likes to do Stronghold stuff, so I was like, I have to buy this one. I don't have a lot of time for YouTube and other stuff over the last few years. That's getting a little better, so I'm looking to get back into that stuff. But so not a lot of experience, I guess.
So you're coming into this with relatively fresh eyes. Nice.
Yeah.
And then Aaron, I hear you're a patron of Matt Colville, so.
Yeah. I guess I wouldn't call myself a super fan, but whatever the level below that would be, I guess. I've seen all the videos. I usually watch them like the day they drop. I've got the Strongholds and Followers back there on my desk somewhere, and I've backed the Kingdoms and Warfare, the next one. So, and for I often find myself attending his live streams. So I guess maybe I am a super fan. Oh no, I don't know. But I'm certainly very.
Well, good. So we've got different.
How long have you been patronizing?
So I didn't. I've been patronizing him for a while. I've been a patron of his thing since Arcadia started, not before, but just when it started.
Okay. Sorry, Jeff. You're the person asking.
No, absolutely no. I am the least qualified person to be asking anything. So I just do it to keep things moving. So we all have we have a range of sort of different perspectives and backgrounds with this work from MCDM, I guess is the thing. Arcadia feels to me a lot like. As I was contemplating it today, it feels a lot like sort of modernizing but trying to catch the lightning in a bottle that was the Dungeon and Dragon magazines that were published for years for D&D by TSR and then Wizards of the Coast and then Paizo under a license from Wizards of the Coast, and then when they went their separate ways, the magazines just sort of mostly died if you don't consider Dragon Plus to be the current incarnation of it. And there have been some attempts to sort of to recreate that magic before, right? Kobold Quarterly was Kobold Press's effort to do a quarterly magazine with a full spread on a regular basis, and they did it for several years before I think they eventually decided it wasn't worth the effort to keep going. At least that's my read. I didn't ask Wolfgang about why they stopped doing it. And I think there's been some others too. I think, was it Luke Gygax has had a magazine that they've been publishing as well. I forget the name of it off the top of my head.
It's called Gygax Magazine.
That makes sense, yes.
Yeah.
And that one I'm less familiar with, but I'm kind of curious, sort of, where does Arcadia to you, how does it compare to those others? How familiar are we with those others that came before? I'm sort of curious where it stacks up. What do you think?
So I have very little context for like the genre that this is like a part of. My only touch point for Dungeon was buying like a second-hand used copy of Dungeon from a comic book store well after the magazine went out of print, and it was like a second edition one that I poured through. But this is the first sort of incarnation of like a D&D. I'll say like a high production value D&D zine that I've like experienced.
Okay. Mm-hmm. For me, I'm pretty confident I'm the oldest person in this conversation, and maybe the oldest of all the different Tome show people in general. I'm not positive about that, but I can't think of anyone older than me. So I started playing in the early '80s, and for me, there are no two more magical words to put together than the words Dragon Magazine. That is just saying that phrase conjures, it just casts a happiness spell on me. just hearing that. And there is no better endorsement than I could actually give for this material that we read for review tonight than I have thought a good dozen times as I've been reading it over the past week or so, that man, sometimes it feels like I'm reading the old Dragon Magazine. And there's literally nothing more positive I could say about it than that. Like I could just walk out of this conversation now and I've said the best thing I can say about it is it often made me feel like that. And man, for 16-year-old Lewis standing in his local game store, picking up the most recent Dragon Magazine and thumbing through it before he bought it, man, that's just mwah.
All right. Yeah. Tracy, what's your background with the predecessors?
I have a bunch of my brother's ones of Dungeon and Dragon magazine, and then obviously I helped contribute to the 4E version. Was it Insider they called it? Online.
They did publish some individual articles, sort of PDFs.
They did
on D&D Insider. Yeah.
Yeah. And then contributed to Kobold Quarterly. So I probably actually have more experience as a contributor than as someone who is consuming.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it's a different experience. So
I didn't even think about it, but what is it? Ian World has an attempted successor as well called Insider, as I recall, right? Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. Like it feels like there's a hunger for this kind of material, right? Dungeon and Dragon went away, and it made Lewis very sad. But
true,
right? But that wasn't necessarily like. It wasn't long after that Kobold Press said, okay, well, I guess if Dungeon and Dragon are going away, there's an opportunity for us to jump in, right? And Wizards kept publishing online articles through D&D Insider, and then Ian World is trying to do something like this, and now MCDM is doing this, and so it seems like it seems like it's a tough format to be successful in, and I would say for reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of the product, it's a tough sort of industry to get into. Like I had similar experiences. I didn't start reading Dungeon and Dragon magazine, specifically Dragon magazine, in the early '80s because I was born right before then, but I did start reading it by the late 80s. I was reading it regularly, and I had subscriptions by the 3rd edition era, and I have a lot of the 2nd edition ones that I just picked up at game shops or whatever. And so I read a lot of Dragon magazines, and really enjoyed them. They were my go-to, like, hey, I've got a few minutes to do something and to read things and whatever, in the era before smartphones and iPads, right? It was oftentimes bathroom reading and that kind of stuff, right? And it was great for that, right? I got my taste of D&D that way. But the world has changed, right? We live in an era of smartphones and tablets and that kind of stuff now. And so I don't, like, if they went back and said, hey, we're going to start publishing Dungeon and Dragon magazine again, I think there'd be a lot of old folks like us that are like, yay, right? Because it's a return to my childhood. But at the same time, like, if I had that subscription right now, I don't know that I would have the same experience with it that I had back then, because there's all these other sort of demands on my attention, or distractions for my attention, as the case may be, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And there's definitely that part, and there's also the part that the industry has changed so much. And when I say industry, I mean like magazines, because it used to be that you didn't have online groups where you could go find a lot of stuff. You didn't have ads all the time, and the ability to look up what's coming out. So the magazine got a lot of money through advertising and other similar types of things that could allow them to pour a lot into the product that a lot of the magazines say don't have, and a lot of people aren't willing to pay the amount of money it actually takes to print that a lot. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off the people.
Yeah, no, that's right. I begrudgingly admit that there is no place for a paper dragon magazine to show up in my mailbox these days, but that makes me surly and makes me want to yell at people to get off my lawn.
Right?
Well, I say so. It's not a viable thing because, again, when these magazines were coming out, especially like in the 80s and early 90s, there was no internet. There was no other source to get this information. This is how you found out about the games. I've had conversations with...
Honestly, I don't even know, and I thought about this as I was reading through these issues that we're talking about in this discussion here, and I don't know... In a lot of the things I loved Dragon Magazine for had nothing to do with the information in the magazines, right? And I thought the same thing as we were reading through these issues. I think it was issue 1 and issue 4, for example, have these more detailed rules for mounted combat, for mounted play, right?
Yeah.
And that's the exact sort of thing that they would have had in a Dragon magazine that I would have been like, this is super interesting, and then never done anything with. Because who's going to remember that specific issue of that magazine has those rules that you need at the time that you need it, right? And so, and I feel this, honestly, I feel the same way looking at this, right? Like, there's some really cool stuff there for mounted combat. There was some really cool stuff there for, there was their underwater combat in issue 2. And then, these sort of alternate rules or deeper, more specific rules or detailed rules or whatever. Like, it's the kind of stuff that it's like, hey, that's cool, and I enjoy it, and it's well done, and it's well laid out, and the art is fantastic, and am I going to remember that it's there at the time that I need it, right? But in the 80s and 90s, like you were talking about, it almost didn't matter because I was engaging in a hobby, I was engaging in my community, I was reading this content, I was getting inspiration for it. Even if I didn't remember that stuff was there, I was engaging my brain with this hobby that I was interested in. And I was reading the letters from people across the country and feeling like I'm part of that community, and all of that stuff was going on. And now there's other ways that I'm doing that. So I'm curious, sort of, Arcadia seems to stack up well, I think, to what was done in the days of yore. But is it serving the same purpose? Because as Tracy pointed out, we have other ways of engaging in our community now.
Yes, certainly. That there's, I think the only community aspect of Arcadia is it's sort of like a badge per se that someone might say, oh, I'm on the Patreon. I have Arcadia. I'm in the Matt Colville community, right? Because as you say, Tracy, like the community aspect is no longer bound to the old magazines, right? But it's like Twitter, Facebook, that's 1,000, right, of these places. So Arcadia, perhaps some might say that it's all killer, right? There's none of the filler, even though Jeff, you described it as the filler kind of being the killer for you back in the day. So yeah, it is interesting to see this like different take on it. It's cool.
When you do have like a group of people that have bought into wanting to bring things into reality in terms of the Patreon, and other folks obviously that buy it outside of that, so you have that community there that isn't the same type of community that you would have had with a magazine, particularly where for a long time a lot of the magazine stuff came from it was great, people bought it, the people needed to buy it in order for the advertisers to pay the money, but that's where the money really came from, not a lot of times, not the subscription fee. But here you have people who are like, I want to buy into this community. I'm paying for this already. That's where the money's coming from. And so and they can have that community aspect outside of the magazine bounds, but they can spotlight really good content in a much, because like it's only about, I think, 4 articles
three
or so,
3 or 4,
an issue. Yeah, so they can spotlight content, and I think that's part of the thing that they're doing too, because I don't know how much folks notice, but if you looked at who's creating this content, this is not your average list of creators, and not from those same backgrounds, right? So, and even the artists I know we're going to talk about it later, but the cover to issue 2 is great.
Yeah,
like, and they're just bringing that sort of life to the game that I thought is pretty awesome.
No, there is a very, and knowing James, who's the editor for Arcadia, the way I do, I know for a fact that there is an intentionality to bring diverse voices and people working on Arcadia that I really appreciate. Like a big part of the value, I think, for the company, for the game of Dungeon and Dragon magazine, is that it was a chance for TSR and then Wizards to sort of test out authors, right? Give somebody an article, let them write a little thing, see how it goes, but it's not a big commitment, right? We're not giving them a book, we're not giving them a chapter in a big hardcover or whatever, right? It's let's give them this article assignment, see how it goes, or they pitched it to us, and we'll, this sounds good, let's let them do it and see if they can hit a deadline and turn in quality work, right? Without the magazines, that angle has gone away, but they have other ways. They've got DM's Guild, and they've got people publishing their own stuff that they can sort of find people from pretty well that way. But even then, I think there's a tendency that certain voices drown out other people who maybe are worthy of attention, and I think they're very intentionally, I think in Arcadia, trying to find those voices and help them not be drowned out, right? And so I'm appreciating and enjoying that as well. We're getting some different ideas that I'm not used to seeing as much.
Yeah, I think you've made a good point. They're doing a good job of platforming some lesser known voice, because that's the first thing I did every issue was scan the names to see whose name I recognize, because I mean we're all D&D super nerds, so we know a lot of names. So but okay, maybe just me, but I bet you guys too.
I'm not a D&D super nerd. The guy who started this podcast almost 15 or over 15 years ago.
That's right. That's right.
Is currently wearing a D&D shirt.
What?
Yeah. So yeah, that's the first thing I did every issue I cracked was scan that list of names to see what names popped out at me, and there were surprisingly few, and I think that's great, because man, this world is full of very smart, very creative people who just need to get their foot in the door, and this is a great way to do it.
And one of the things I've really appreciated about it, which unfortunately has little to do with it, I mean, it's not unfortunate, but in some ways has less to do with the content, although I liked that part too, but the fact that this is real production value, because one of the issues I've often seen when we try to do that diversity of voices, and I don't want to say this is only about diverse voices, but it is a key component to the intentionality of what's going on, is the production values there. There's a group of playtesters who are actually playtesting the stuff that's being written and contribute it. They're doing a really great job in layout. They're paying for artwork, and it looked like the editing was done really well. And so all of that together means that not only are we giving that platform, but it's not a low rent or anything sort of situation. Like, they're going to be able to shine. And as much as I love content and stuff like that, I don't currently have a game I'm running, so I can't use it in that way. But I love, like, that was what I saw right away, and I just loved it.
Yeah, I think Arcadia, like, it kind of stands, and maybe there's other things like this, but it sort of stands, as you said, Tracy, having these really high production values and like paying its authors quite well. I think they get like 25 cents a word, which I'm not in the industry, but I understand is quite high. And I guess they pay for rewrites too, and we'll often ask authors to write extra if they feel the article needs something. They will commission more words. It's cool that the MCDM has the resources, thanks to this like big community Madaspil, to really treat the freelancers very well, at least as far as I gather.
Well, and I think one of the I was thinking about it because like we've sort of talked about earlier, this is an industry, the magazine industry, right, is an industry that it's been very difficult for people to do D&D magazines since Dungeon and Dragon went away, and make it successful. But I almost feel like there's a different tack to this entirely. That this isn't them trying to publish a magazine. This is them having added value to those people who are patrons of what they're doing, of the company. Right? And so it's more about like, we have this community, they are supporting us, let's do this thing that gives them sort of a monthly reward for them allowing us to sort of do the work that we're doing. And that's, I think, a different approach, right? Because you're building the community first and you're letting them support the work as opposed to trying to sell them a thing.
Yeah, and it's not the same aesthetic as a lot of zines, but it has that same sort of feel to me, in terms of the community part and what they're trying to accomplish through it.
Yeah. Although it very much feels like somewhere between Kobold Press and Dragon Magazine in terms of the layout and the aesthetic. To me, like both in production value, but there seems to be an aesthetic that they're sort of trying to match, although they're also leaning very heavily into the fact that they are, or not heavily, but occasionally you'll see them leaning into the fact that they are not primarily trying to publish a print magazine, right? So there was an adventure in issue 2 or 3 where there was, hey, and here's a link, play this song for your players, right? And you click it and it opens up a little audio file, right? And at the end of each issue, there's like a page of links to resources, like here's the various versions of the maps that you might need for this adventure or what have you. So they're recognizing that like we are not a print magazine. We're not trying to do just a digital version of a print magazine. We're trying to lean into a little bit the things that make digital publishing different, and make that work well. Now that also leaves the guy who still has boxes of old articles that I saved from Dragon Magazine, right, in my storage room. That area leaves me a little worried because I'm like, well, what happens if this goes away? And in 20 years after that, and I want to find that I want to run this adventure, and now the links don't work, you know. So, but in the meantime, I mean, I think it's brilliant and a great idea to sort of lean into the fact that you are digital, and that means you can do things differently, and you should do things differently. So there are 4 issues now into this project, with issue 5, I imagine, coming out any week now. It's June, so they should be on issue 5 here soon. Aaron, you follow better than I do. Is that right?
I think so. They've been usually coming out near the end of the month.
End of the month,
so
okay.
Perhaps another week or two, yeah.
So we're a week or two away probably from issue 5 coming out. They missed the 1 month in there. I'm not a patron, and I don't follow what's going on with MCDM very closely, other than the occasional emails I get from James. That's the advantage of being friends with the guy who's editing Arcadia, right? Is that occasionally I get emails from James to let me know what's going on and send me review copies of things. But so I was a little worried at one point, like, well, if they're going to go like 2 months on, 1 month off, and it's and you know, kind of like is the way it looked after those first 2 or 3 issues, I was a little worried that like being a patron and just buying each issue as it comes out is basically coming out the same, right? But it sounds like if that was just a one-time sort of blip, as they adjusted their workflow and got used to what they were doing and what have you. Then being a patron at $5 a month means that you get this. Otherwise, you have to pay $7 to get it. And hopefully they got the kinks worked out and what have you. So 4 issues in, have you seen an evolution? Have you seen a change compared to in issue 4 versus issue 1? What have you noticed as they've progressed? I mean, there's not a lot of time to change and grow, but what have you noticed in that short time?
I can't say that there's been much change, honestly. To me, in a way, it's kept a fairly high standard in almost all the categories going forward. They took a break after the 3rd one to sort of evaluate things, but I don't see any drastic changes with the 4th issue. The cover art's still great. The price is the same. The layout is basically identical. I don't know what they changed, but it's not perceptible to my vision.
Sure. The only thing I've noticed so far, and again, I read these over a relatively short span of time, not from January to May, like a subscriber would have. But the first issue, about the only weak point I saw in it was the titles sometimes weren't as descriptive, or the and were lacking subtitles, and they were kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe burying the lead. Like, I'd be a paragraph in and not know what kind of article I was about to read, which felt off for a magazine. And I wonder if someone talked to them about that and they fixed it. And then by issue 2, that was already changing. So I saw that. But yeah, the overall quality, I don't see any drop off at all. Now, James in his editorial or his editor's note at the beginning of the most recent one made the comment that the feedback they've gotten is that what people are least interested in is the little micro adventures. That's the least thing they're looking for. Okay. So I think they'll continue to adjust, and call audibles as they get feedback from the community, which is, again, the great strength of this sort of an environment that we live in now, where you can have almost instantaneous feedback from your community. Right. And since you're not physically publishing, you can make changes much more quickly. So I found those articles very useful, but I understand why some people would not, because some people who are like, I don't usually write my own stuff. I mostly run pre-written stuff, but I could see ways to stick some of those little micro adventures in some of the narratives I'm doing. So I still found them helpful.
I actually really like the adventures that are in there. I kind of don't hate having more of that. And I don't, just like the old Dragon magazine, I got an occasional dungeon, but I didn't read a lot of dungeon back in the day. I did get all of the Kobold Quarterlies. I find that the usefulness almost is irrelevant. Because I'm not going to, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to remember what's where when I want it, right? Unless I see an adventure or I see a thing that's like, oh, that's going to be useful for me next week or next month in my game or whatever. But my players are all high level, and even MCDM is not publishing high level content at this point. So here I am not getting much use out of it. But I find it to be great sources of inspiration. I think there's a lot of fun ideas. DM Nell in the chat wants to know what all is included. What kind of content is being published? Is it new monsters, new rules, fiction adventures? It's most of those. There's little fiction blurbs on some of the articles, but there's not really fiction otherwise. But it's new monsters.
Yeah, not fiction like the old D&D Dragon magazine days.
But there's new monsters. There was the elementals that were sort of new. Was it 4 new elementals that were based on the periodic table of elements, which I thought were really fun and clever and interesting. And I couldn't, in my head, get past but that's not how the elemental planes work. Where do they come from? Right? Because that's where
the elemental plane of Argon.
Right. But that's my hang-ups, right? There's new or expanded rules for mounted combat and underwater exploration. There was been, in the 4 issues, there's been, 2 maybe adventures and 1 sort of adventure location.
Yeah.
And so and then they also asked if it's focused on strongholds and followers. I have never looked at a copy of Strongholds and Followers, and I follow the magazine just fine. So there you are. If you can handle reading Wizards of the Coast stuff without knowing about the Forgotten Realms, then this is or Kobold Press stuff without digging into Midgard. This is more generalized than that. Every now and then you'll have an author who references sort of a setting that's connected to the world of Matt Colville, I think, but it's not heavy-handed.
Yeah, I feel like that's mostly in like flavor text. Well, we would have called it flavor text if it was in italics at the bottom of a Magic card. Right. I don't know what you call it in a magazine setting.
Nope, that's about right.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, Emmerich Allwatcher in the chat points out something that I've oftentimes thought about, going back all the way back to Dragon Magazine. Like, if there was some sort of index, if I could just buy a document, or in the modern age, if I could have a website that says, here's all the adventures, here's all the monsters in MCDM, and what CR they are, a little blurb about them, and what issue you can find them in, that would be killer. So James, if you are hearing or watching this, make that happen. I know you've got the pull.
That's right.
Yeah, I think they plan to do yearly hardcover compilations, which could maybe alleviate that a smidge, but point still stands.
But yeah, I mean, I almost don't want a compilation of all of the issues. I want a compilation of here's every 2 years, here's the MCDM monster manual of all the monsters that were presented, and here's the anthology of all the adventures, so I can just have those books organized in that way. Yeah. Do they use Colville's action-oriented monster stat block? I don't know what that is, so Aaron might have to tell us that.
No. The Colville action-oriented stuff, I think, is being sort of reserved for an upcoming MCDM monster book. There is relatively little of that. If you really dig that design, there isn't much of it here, mostly because Matt's not writing any of it, right? Like, his design doesn't really permeate the stuff. It's his sort of aesthetic and vision more, and the content is from all the
and I guess we don't know what his involvement is or isn't. We have recently reached out to possibly have actually Lewis do an interview, and maybe he can find out some more of that information if that happens. Like I've mentioned before, I know somebody with connections in this, so I'm hoping that James can help us out there.
That's right. We know a guy.
We know a guy. So there's that. Yeah. So and I find that's consistent. Like, I've seen that. I don't know. When I look at the adventures that are published in these, they have slightly different formats, right? The thing that comes first is a little bit different. Whether there's a synopsis of the adventure may or may not be there, and I'm not sure. This is the way things are going anyway, right? Candlekeep Mysteries that Wizard of the Coast published was the exact same way. Each author sort of organized things and wrote things the way they wanted to, and Wizards didn't force them to fit into a specific template too rigidly. And so there's a part of me that's like, well, that's good. Let the author write in a way that's going to work for them. But there's also a part of me that's like, yeah, but when I'm skimming through a bunch of adventures, I want to be able to know where to look and how much I need to read to sort of get a glimpse of whether or not this is a thing I'm going to want to use. I don't want to have to, and when it's in a different place every time, that can be a little tricky as well. So, and that might be a little bit similar to the conversation that Aaron, I think, mentioned with the stat blocks, and that the authors are sort of doing their own thing with a lot of that, right? So I don't have a solution, because I like the idea of authors doing their own thing, but I also like being able to find stuff quickly because it's all in the same place. So
sure. Yeah.
Oh, making noises. So I wanted to ask then. Let's take some time. What is our favorite thing that we saw in these first 4 issues? What stood out to you as particularly good?
Well, I'll go first. For me, honestly, I think the most valuable thing, in the sense that it's very likely to trickle into my game table life, is actually the mounted combat stuff. That there's an article from Willie. Is his last name pronounced Abil? Does anybody know?
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's
is
how you
it
say it.
okay? Yeah. In issue 1, and then there's a kind of a sequel to it in issue 4. And I found that incredibly profitable, because it felt like they spotted a kind of a crack in the rule structure of D&D that needed some filling in there, and they put some useful material in place. The aerial combat stuff in issue 3 was pretty good as well, from Sam Manel, but it's a lot more complicated, and I didn't have the time to read it. As if we were only reviewing 1 issue of this magazine, I'd have really dug into that a lot more and tried to understand the system, but it had a lot more moving parts. But I was appreciative of that too, because those are pieces of, because most D&D happens with dudes running across the ground and swinging swords at each other and hurling fireballs, but sometimes it's dudes on horses, or sometimes it's dudes flying through the sky, and that's good.
Well, and the real innovation to me, I mean, the real sort of meat of those mounted combat articles, the one in 1 and 4, right? Like the rules mechanics that they added to that was actually relatively small. It was basically like a keyword to certain creatures that they are mounted. And then just sort of a brief description of basically of the action economy of when do they act and what actions do they get to do, and how does that interfere or affect the action economy of the person who's on their back, and what have you, right? But the real meat of it was, and now here's like 4 or 5 stat blocks for specific and oftentimes weird, especially in the second article, weird creatures that you can have as mounted. That was the real, like, especially the second one. Like, at that point, we didn't get a lot of new rules. There were some new magic items for mounted combat and what have you, right? But it was like, but here's how you can ride a what is it, boulet, or purple worm as a mount, or whatever. Although the last little bit there was like the large sort of mass transit purple worm as a mount was a weird little thing to add in. Like, it's in the concept I've seen and heard before. Like, even the idea of a purple worm that like swallows you and then spits you out in a different location. I've used that in my game before, but it's not really mounted. Like, it's not. It doesn't really, like, it could have stood alone and been fine and had nothing to do with the rest of this article, I think, too. It's not really a mounted combat sort of aspect. So,
yeah.
Sure. I think I heard Matt say that was sort of like a or Willie, who is the author, sort of say that like that was maybe a preview of coming attractions, those big like megalith mounts or whatever they're called. Could perhaps be a third mounted article in the future.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was all off of my favorite
that was
thing.
That was Lewis's favorite thing. Yeah. Who else had a favorite thing?
Tracy, what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, and I already did mention the cover of issue 2, but I did kind of like the Sam from the adventure in the first issue as well. I thought that was a cool idea.
Such a fun adventure.
That was going to be my favorite thing, actually.
Oh,
no, that's fine. No, that adventure. That's why, like, I think it was Aaron who had said that, like, the thing they're looking for the least is the adventures, right? And yet, and maybe this is why, right? They're maybe getting a lot of adventures, but they're only picking the cream of the crop to publish. But like, some of the adventures were some of the most fun things, right? I like so the idea behind the Sam was basically it was how do you do a high fantasy D&D like rogue AI on the space station sort of adventure, right? And so the wizard's laboratory had become sentient, and now you've got to go in and sort of figure out what's going on and deal with it. And when it's all said and done, you can basically like download the laboratory or the building sentience into a what was it, like a shield guardian or whatever that you can travel with and whatever. That sounds a lot of fun to me.
And SAM stands for Structure for Assisted Magic.
Yeah, I ran a party through that adventure, and it was really touch and go at the end whether they were going to let Sam for free or if they were too scared of the potential that Sam could unleash upon the world.
Well, and the adventures they have are like little locations. Like this one was like, here's a tower, right? There was a mystery one. It was an issue 3 or 4, which was like, here's an adventure that just sort of takes place in this one manor, right? And it's really a 1 or 2 session adventure. Like they're short little things because it's a magazine, right? But that's the exact sort of thing that I like. I've got a campaign. I've got this large meta arc in my head, but that's where like Candlekeep Mysteries or this kind of stuff really shines for me. It's like, yeah, but we're at 14th, 15th, whatever level it is now. What adventures can I sort of sprinkle in to add a little bit of variety and to have side quests or these other things that help the world feel alive, so that everything going on isn't all about this one sort of meta plot, right? That's where these things really shine for me, and it's unfortunate that both of those adventures seemed a lot of fun and really interesting, and I would totally use them, except that that's not where I'm at level-wise, and I don't want to have to crank everything up like 12 levels to make it work, so...
Sure. Yeah, I've got my eye on that Manor one. We're about done with my guys are in the mid... My guys, there's two girls in there, one of them being my own daughter.
Your players.
my team, my table, my table is about 13th level or so, man. But we're going to be wrapping up in about 3 or 4 more levels, and then we're going to start over at level 1. And I've got my eye on that Manor one already for sticking it on the side of the road somewhere where we're going to do some stuff.
Nice. I mean, it would have fit in really
well.
What
about you, Aaron? Did you say one yet?
That manor would have gone really well into the middle of Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Like it would fit like a glove in there. So anyway, I'm sorry. Yes, Aaron. What was your favorite?
Man, so there's so many good ones. I think maybe one that I glossed over at first, but then in this review, actually went back and read it more thoroughly. Was in the first issue, the Uquaviel the Recreant. Article about those 2 super high level angels and the drama between them, and I think this is a good example of like the kind of article that MCDM does, where they give you the initial thing they promised, but then like in most articles they also give you like, and there's also this, and here's some stat blocks, and here's like maybe also an adventure, like all in one article. I was super impressed as I was reading it of there's all these the writing is really good, and it sort of outlines not just the characters but like the campaign that you could play with them, and like it gives you like role-playing cues of like specific scenes that it would like ask you to hone in on, which I thought was really useful. As a DM, you sort of like...
I'm a sucker for angels, devils, demons, all that kind of stuff in my game, so and I've got a future Descent into Avernus game coming up. I wonder if I couldn't go in there and stick those 2 angels in Avernus and have a lot of fun with them too.
I think Uquaviel could definitely be in Avernus. He's all fallen and such. Yeah,
that could be cool. All right, now I got it. At the same time, though, you do get some of the, and this is both the beauty and the risk with things like this, is that sometimes you also get like the weird stuff. It allows them to experiment. It allows them to play with some things. And that's where like the periodic elementals came out, and they kind of work. I don't think I would make them elementals. I would make them like some sort of magical constructs or creations or guardians or whatever, and they would work really well. Just because I can't break my brain around the inner planes and the way they are constructed in my second edition brain. But at the same time, like, then there was the one, I think it was in issue 4, there was the article with like the 3 or 4 new races, or ancestries, I guess is the name that they're moving towards, right? That were all like dream based, and so there's like an ancestry where or ancestries that are the people that that put dreams into people's heads, or that can go into people's dreams and manipulate them, and all kinds of stuff there. And there's a lot of weirdness there, and I think like a character with something like that would be interesting, but like 3 different races tells me like you could end up with a bunch of different characters doing these weird things, and that would be a strange little adventure, right?
Yes.
I don't think it's poorly done, and I think it's super creative. It's just weird.
And I think that's part of the coolness, right? Like, and I think Tracy, you mentioned the covers, and I think the covers like say a lot about Arcadia in the fact that they're big, they're bold, they're bright colors. They show like different kinds of like people and like different settings, and so it sort of primes you for like there's gonna be some weird like off the wall stuff in here, and like that's the point, right? That's why you would pick it up to buy something different.
It does bother me a little bit sometimes. So like there was one of those races was like people born from the dreams of aberrations, right? So when a beholder dreams, it creates a beholder being or whatever, and it has like tables of here's this weird aberrant thing about you, like your skin is see-through, or your organs are external, or stuff like that, and then they have this beautiful art that is clearly an aboleth humanoid pictured there. And the thing that bothers me is that the list of potential things that you can have as weird sort of cosmetic changes based on your aberrant background don't include any of the things that would make that cool aboleth character possible, right? I mean, clearly you could just make it up and say that's what I am, but like, I don't know. In my head, I wanted the chart to point me to what do I have to roll to get the 3 eyes and look like an aboleth, so.
And just to say, perhaps that's like a pipeline thing that they're working out in the coming issues.
And it very well. I mean, I don't know what the workflow is, but I feel like there's a quicker turnaround. Like Wizards of the Coast is working on, like, they're writing stuff well in advance of publication, and they've got art orders. They got time for art orders in between or what have you after things are written and what have you. I imagine that there's a quicker turnaround on something like a magazine, and so the art orders and the writing are often, I imagine, are happening more or less simultaneously. So it's harder to sort of coordinate that. It doesn't bother me to the point that, like, that's bad, right? It's just sort of one of those niggling things. Yeah. It's like, any other things that stood out to you as either being particularly good or things that maybe were concerns of yours as you read through it or thought about this as a format? What do you think?
2 good things. First of all, the article you mentioned about the sleepkin. What's the word we're using instead of races now? Again, I'm sorry.
Ancestries.
Yes.
Ancestries. Thank you. The sleepkin ancestries. The art for the Sand Speaker is stunning. I don't know who did that, but I want to buy them a pizza. Whatever that was. I immediately understood what they were going for with that art, because it reminded me instantly, because again, I'm old enough that I played with marbles as a child, with my buddies out in circles of dirt, and things like that. And the glass marbles that had the swirls of color inside them. These days, the young kids do it with dice now. but I immediately understood what the artist was trying to do there, and it is just a beautiful, creative piece of art. And man, high five to that artist, whoever that was. But secondly, something we haven't mentioned, but I thought that was incredibly helpful and useful was in issue 4. I've got the table of contents here in front of me. The just the small collection of on the road encounters by Derek Ruiz. Yeah, that's super fantastic. Because man, your characters are always going from point A to point B.
Right.
And I mean, and random encounter tables have existed since the beginning of time. And these are some nice little structured, non-random encounters that you could just drop in of as you're walking down the road, you turn the corner, and this.
No, I thought the same thing.
Really well
that was in my contention list for favorite things, was that, because that is, it's not an adventure, whatever, right? It was like 3 or 4. Basically, they're random encounters that aren't random. 5. And again, it was one of those things where it's like, oh, this is super cool, and I'm not going to use it because my current campaign is way higher level than that. But like, if there was a book of these organized by level, so that I didn't, because random encounters kind of suck. But at the same time, you like to make the world feel alive, so you want to have something happen, like, and the world is alive, or like, I felt like I had to do the random encounters when I ran out of the abyss for at least a while, because like the Underdark is supposed to be dangerous. If you can just go from place to place and don't run into anything trying to eat you, then why does everybody stay out of the Underdark, right? So you need to have some kind of encounters. But I like these that are a little more interesting. They're, you could spend some of these you could spend a whole session sort of dealing with and exploring and whatever, right? That's a little more intentional, a little more unique. It's not just, we're on our way and bandits popped out. No. There's actually a few of them where you're on your way and there's a caravan that keeps getting hit by bandits and they're asking you for help, and now you've got a certain amount of time. You're outnumbered, but you can build the battlefield the way that you want to see if you can pull it off, right? Or there's a group of bandits, but are they? Or it's not bandits, but maybe they are, and then little things like that it's not just this standard, like you're going down the road and big bad monster jumps out of the trees to attack you, which is boring, and yet sometimes that's what I kind of end up defaulting to,
Sure, yeah. An owlbear attacks.
Right.
I
I like this too, and I
whatever.
want a whole hardcover book of it, and I want it organized by level so that when I'm going through, they did the similar, and I think James actually worked on some of these, like for the hardcovers that WotC put out on DM's Guild. They'd put out like encounters in Avernus and encounters in Waterdeep or whatever, right? And some of those I think are better than others, but like the Avernus one, like I would just go through when I was running Avernus for my kids, and they were going from place to place. I'd be like, all right, well, let's roll a d20 and see if you run into anything that you can't just flat out outrun in your Infernal War Machine, right? And then I would just go through that list. I wouldn't even bother rolling half the time. I'd be like, that one looks kind of interesting, and I'd just kind of use them all one at a time. So yeah, more of that. I agree. That was a really long. That was a really long-winded way to say, Lewis, you're smart. Good job.
I would look at the MCDM folks right in the eye and say, hey, bring Derek Rees back every 3 issues for another article just like that, and just keep doing that, because that's a super helpful tool.
Perhaps worth mentioning too, in that article, there is at least one of the encounters that has no combat at all. It's just you meet a cool NPC, which I think is also like worthy and super useful.
Absolutely.
So my only real concern with this is the same as my concern that I have with a lot of, I'm in higher education, right? So I have academic journals that I get and what have you, and I prefer everything digitally. I don't need paper copies of anything ever, but there is a workflow of, okay, that means now there's a new issue out. I have to go to the website. I have to log in. I have to download the new issue. I have to put it in my Dropbox, and then I have to import it into Goodreader on my iPad to read. And it's just several steps before I can read, which is not quite as convenient as, hey, the new Dragon magazine is here. Let me stick that in my pocket and carry it around until I get a moment to look at it a little bit, right? And so that's my concern for me personally. I don't know if this is the kind of thing I'm regularly going to fit into my sort of daily life workflow, if you will, to be able to have easy access to it all the time. But I don't know. Lately, I mean, I've been getting review copies from James, and those are real easy because they're just direct links to download, and I stick them exactly where I want them. But
Sure.
I think one of my concerns, and it goes a little bit to the question Marcus Bird 27 asked about, like, what would we like to see in Arcadia to set them apart, and it is a little bit of that interaction with the community. And one of the things I'm thinking of when I'm talking about it is the comic Bitch Planet, and they had this whole thing in the back where you would get letters from people that read it. A lot of times it was like fan art. They would do an interview with someone out in the community that, you know, maybe had an outlook that was went along with the story that was in that particular issue or something like that. And it was cool because that stuff you actually didn't get when they compiled it into the I forget what they call it, the market book, or
the
something like that.
trade paperback.
The trade paperback, yeah. So you had to, like, as you got the issues is how you got that content. But there was a lot of people talking about the stuff that they saw in the issues and building that sort of community that lived on past whatever happens to be where we are in online message boards or something like that any particular day.
Well, and I wonder if, like, it's the old school letters page that you're looking for, right?
Well, but it's slightly different because the letters page often, it could deal with the content that happened to be in a former issue, like a previous issue, but sometimes letters in Dungeon and Dragon were more general.
Right. That's true. So I wonder if they're not trying to, if they don't envision the the Patreon and the interaction on Twitter and the YouTube comments as sort of the fill-in for that. But I get it. Like, if you're not there in those places at that time, you aren't getting that engagement. At the same time, I don't, like, one of the things, the articles are relatively timeless, but things like letters and comments and that kind of stuff oftentimes are very focused on that particular moment in time. So I don't know. I mean, I find myself looking at these things a year or two later and then just skipping, obviously, the editorials or the letters pages because I'm not in that moment of time anymore.
Yeah, and that could happen. The other thing, though, is if it's something that you keep reading and you want to know, like, okay, I saw this adventure. How did it actually play out at people's tables who weren't play testers or other stuff? Like, did people come up with a good idea for them? And if they curate that and then include it in the future issues, that could be cool.
Yeah, that's true.
And it could go also to why people would want to open it in a timely manner, kind of like what you were talking about in terms of you don't always necessarily open your journals from work, even though you know you should.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. We are a good amount over an hour now, so I want to go on to sort of last thoughts. I think we've talked through these 4 issues pretty well. We've gotten people a sense of what's in there and the value and the production quality and all that kind of stuff. So does anybody have any last thoughts? Things that you noticed or that you saw, things that maybe you wanted to talk about but we never got to? Anything else you want to mention before we wrap things up?
Just super brief. You mentioned, Tracy, about the community. There is, at least for a few of the issues, I think James has sent out Patreon notifications, collecting a lot of the community stuff that's been produced from the issues. So while it's not in the issue itself, and that would be cool. That is a great idea. It does like kind of exist, but not like necessarily directly in the way that you had envisioned. Other than that, like as a final thought, just like every article is great in its own way. I could sit here for as long as it would take and be like, and this article's cool, and this article's cool. Oh, this one's also great also.
Yeah, I didn't see any duds.
Yeah. So if you were looking for cool, slightly off the wall articles about D&D stuff that more than the blush, like Jeff, you mentioned the elemental article. I think the monsters are cool, but the juice was at the end where it gave you this whole like, yeah, but here's how all the elementals can interact,
Right.
And you can sort of have this like legendary action kind of like economy with like 3 elementals all affecting each other.
Right. What if the conductor?
That's just like juice for encounter design.
The conductor elemental and the electricity or electron elemental sort of got together? What kind of weird interaction would that have? Yeah, that was cool.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this in my closing comments. The art is fantastic. The layout is fantastic. They've made a beautiful product. And I actually want to yield the rest of my time to ask Aaron a question as a subscriber who's been receiving this stuff as he's come along and as a Patreon person. Aaron, do you have any access to their pledge numbers and how much their pledges jumped when these magazines started coming out? Do you have any sense of that?
Oh, I do not know how much it jumped.
I can tell you their website says they have
check.
9,299 patrons.
Yeah,
Okay.
so times that by 5, and that'd be their. I'm sure Patreon takes a cut, of course, but
Patreon's cut is relatively small.
Sure, because I was one of the ones that jumped on for the start of Arcadia, so I am part of that like bump.
Sure.
That they
Sure.
got.
I'm curious about the perceived value in the broader gaming community of how many people went, oh, they're doing that, cha-ching, and kind of push their chips in on that at that point.
So it's like slightly interesting. It a little bit touches on what you just said. After the first 3, they did like a survey of what people thought, and they found that like almost like 90% of their readers were dungeon masters. There were almost no players who read Arcadia. So I think that's something they want to like try to course correct a bit, or at least cater to the dungeon masters more.
Yeah, I mean
that's
that's I don't know. I would guess that that's probably true of almost every D&D product that's ever been published. So
yeah. It quite surprised Matt. He was quite sort of agog by it in the live stream where he talked about it. But sure.
Yeah, I mean, other than players' handbooks, most products are DM facing, or at least even the ones that are here's a collection of optional rules. Like at my table, I'm the only one that has Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and that's primarily a bunch of player options or whatever, right? But the DM gets it, and then everybody else has access. So
That's right.
all right. Any other last thoughts?
That's it for me.
All right. Then we're going to go ahead and call this the end of the episode.
We'd like to say thank you to Galder's Gazetteer, our patrons like Doug Palmer, Hyperlexic, James Delicio, Jill Sanders, and Leonard Pelletier. Those patrons are the ones that make the show possible. Without them, Jeff would be paying for the show out of his own pocket. So thanks to all of you. And we also want to thank our guests for the episode. Aaron Good, where can folks find you?
So you can find me on Twitter at TBoneDoog. I post mostly about like music stuff, but also some D&D. I don't do any industry things, so don't follow me if you want that.
And Lewis Brenton, where can folks find you?
The primary place is running around in the Tomeverse with some of these fine people. The best way to reach me is through the Tome Show News specific Twitter, which is at Tome Show News. And you can reach me and Tracy, who's one on my news team as well.
Ooh, Tome Show News.
That's right. We got to say three out of 4 people here are directly involved in Tome Show News. Aaron edits, Tracy and Lewis are at the news desk. So, all right. Well, if you want to get a hold of the show, you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter. I am at Squatch, SQUACH. Tracy is at Sarah Dark Magic, Sarah with an H. Dark Magic with an M. I don't know where that would be confusing. You can also find the show on Twitter. We are at The Tome Show. We are on Facebook. We have a Discord that you can email for, or if you go to that Twitter account, The Tome Show, you'll find a link to the Discord there as well. We are on Twitch right now as we speak with all those folks that you heard us talking about in the chat. We have a YouTube channel. I don't know. What else we got going on?
Is there a Tome Show Pinterest?
Not that I know of.
Instagram account?
No, there's no Instagram. There used to be a G+.
Live
there used to be a
journal?
G+. We don't have a live journal. Yeah, no. I think that's where we're at. If you want to start a live journal or an Instagram for us, you're welcome to.
I'm good. I'll leave that to Ishmael.
Yeah.
Sweet. And that's episode 352, where we got a little bit of everything for $7 an issue as we looked at Arcadia in this episode of
The Tome. Stop that recording. Turn off my sidecar. Thank you, everybody. This was fun.
Sweat.
I hope you had a good time.
That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
So, yeah, we were supposed to originally also have Pruitt from WebDM join us. But he backed out on, he emailed me on, Saturday or Sunday saying he wasn't going to be able to make it. He had something else come up for tonight. And I'm like, well, if you want me, I can check. If you want me to, I can check with everybody else and see if we can move it to Tuesday. And then he never responded, so I just left it the way it was. So, the WebDM is making the rounds. They've got their Kickstarter going on right now. We just had Jim on last week for a post-apocalyptic D&D recording, which made sense because that's what they're kickstarting is a post-apocalyptic D&D book. So. All right. Cool. Well, I'm going to turn off the stream if folks want to say goodbye to the stream.
Bye, stream.